Does any of this make you uncomfortable? My name is Matthew Kroll.
And how the fuck did this happen? My name is Shahir Dowd.
And this is the only podcast about movies, specifically the film Fahrenheit 11/9.
The sequel to
Fahrenheit 9/11.
which is also the sequel to
Sicko.
March 23rd. No,
I don't know. Like, where were you going, Shahir?
I don't know where I was going.
You know what? We need someone to actually right the ship and let us know where, in fact, we are going, because I'm, after watching this film, a little concerned. So, ladies and gentlemen, fellow human beings, it is my extreme pleasure to introduce to you the CEO of the production company Hardpin. He was also the live producer with the 2012 Obama campaign, and one of my original TRL brethren from back in the day. Please give a warm Topan welcome to Mr. Simon Koss.
Hello.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
And you literally just walked out of this movie like a second ago. So do you need a minute?
Yes.
Are you good?
No, I think I finished half my beer, so I'm feeling a little better about myself.
And let's be clear, you didn't walk out of the movie. You finished it and left the theater.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I think you were the only one unclear about that.
Sometimes I get unclear about a lot of things. You being here is a bit fortuitous, and I don't know, a cool little happenstance of like the New York connectivity thing. Shahir told me, he's like, oh, I got a great guest for Fahrenheit 9/11. He was the live producer for the 2012 Obama campaign. I was like, oh, awesome. I'm like, what's their name? And he said Simon Koss. I was like, motherfucker.
Small world.
It's so cool.
Big city, small world.
Yeah.
So the way I got to you as well is I reached out to a friend of mine. I was like, look, we're doing Fahrenheit 11/9, and I want someone who has an interesting perspective on both either the documentary world or politics. And they came up with your name. And when I saw your credentials, I was like, this is the guy we must have on the show. You've had an interesting trajectory in your career, obviously starting with MTV with TRL and doing those kinds of shows. But you managed to, you ended up on the Obama campaign in 2012, producing his live stream. So I think you have a unique insight into the way politics and filmmaking kind of coalesce in interesting ways, right?
Yeah, I think it was a really, really powerful experience that I got to have with my wife and now lots of very close friends that I got to work with over that time period. But it was unique in the sense that it was kind of like the first digital political campaign.
Right.
It had to start on the national level because they needed the money to be able to pull something like that off. And they brought together like real filmmakers to work on that team, and a lot of people that are super talented that probably worked for a fraction of what they're used to making or able to make in the real world, to kind of work on something that everybody kind of felt really strongly about, and a candidate that we all really believed in. So that was a really, really powerful and amazing experience. So something that I cherish.
And you worked both on Obama's campaign and Hillary's campaign, right?
Yes and no. I definitively worked on Obama's campaign. I was part of that digital video team. For the Hillary campaign, my wife, Sierra, was the director of video. So she actually ran that video team. And I was already running with my partners running Hardpin. So I was doing that. And so we ended up just being kind of a resource for that campaign. So when they didn't have enough people on staff yet, when they needed to do their launch video because they didn't exist yet.
Yeah.
Nobody knew who Hillary was.
Right? Well, nobody knew who we were, and continued to not know because we weren't allowed to talk about it.
Sure.
So we helped out where we could, whether it was doing like larger live streams or if they wanted to, if they were strapped with resources because all the people they had hired were already out in the field, they would come to us and kind of say like, hey, can you fill in, have one of your directors of photography go out and cover this event or whatever it was.
You were the black ops of political videography.
Yeah, at a heavy discount, but yes. So it was also a rewarding experience. They contrary to what people reflecting about that campaign, there was a lot of really great people on that video team as well, and they did really, really awesome work. And I think it doesn't get enough credit, but yeah, it's my opinion.
So there's been an interesting thing, I think, before we even get to the movie, that I've noticed as a filmmaker and thinking about politics and filmmaking, is that political campaign videos, and I think the first inkling I saw of this was in Bernie Sanders' campaign prior to the election, but there was this sense that real filmmakers were getting involved in political videos. You know, like my impression previously of that, and maybe I'm wrong about this, is that political campaign videos were kind of, stand up, hey, I'm this guy, I'm doing this, yada yada yada, and it started on Bernie Sanders' campaign. You can see it in Randy Bryce's campaign,
Yeah,
the Iron
yeah,
Stash.
yeah.
And Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez's videos as well. That there is like a real depth of cinematic storytelling to those videos, which I hadn't previously seen. I wondered, your company kind of deals in this world in some way.
We're funny you should bring that up. I'm very well versed in this right now because ironically, a few weeks back, my company was interviewed by the New York Times as it relates to that kind of video creation.
Yeah.
For our part in creating, there's a candidate in Connecticut called Johanna Hayes.
Yes.
We did her video, and it kind of got her national attention, and she was kind of propelled further with that. And so we were interviewed for that, and the big thing they wanted to get from us was like, how do you make a viral video? Like,
right.
How do you how do these candidates, and like, we didn't kind of like take the bait in the way that some of the other, I think they interviewed the Randy Bryce guys and a couple of the other companies that have done videos like that. And our position is kind of like, look, we're filmmakers. We lean into kind of documentary filmmaking, which to us is really just kind of opening a window to who a person is.
Yeah.
Right. And so like, that is successful when you have a good person to document. And Randy Bryce had a great story, and they were able to tell that story in a really compelling way. And the same thing for us with Johanna Hayes. So it wasn't like a thing like we went to her and said, we're going to make a viral video. It's going to be really cool. It was, what do you do? Like, what do you care about? And we tried to capture that. And it, if it's authentic, if you don't overscript it. You obviously in politics you need to hit your points and make your kind of arguments. We think that's compelling and that will translate. We actually did the video work for Kathy Myers, who was running against Randy Bryce in that campaign. And the funny story about that, which I'll tell really quickly, is she is a great candidate. Actually, I think much more compelling because he's now getting in trouble for a whole slew of things as it relates to his brother, calling him out on things and yada, yada, yada. But she's a teacher. She had done work in politics. She came from really humble beginnings, all this stuff. But when she started her campaign, she wanted to like go with the local video team, really lean into Wisconsin.
Yeah.
And the video was just a little flat. Like, no disrespect to the local film crew in Wisconsin that did that video, but it just didn't have that kind of like, it just was, the colors were flat. It wasn't shot in a way that kind of like really leaned into what she was. And so she really started with like, he started way ahead of her because of that.
Right.
Because he got this national attention, this money, this force. And then we kind of got involved 6 months later, did her video, and she really got a lot of push from that, but it was just never enough to catch up to him because at that point he had Bernie Sanders behind him, all this stuff. And politics is a game of sometimes if you're first to the table, that's all that matters.
And also, I think I use a lot of food analogies on this show, but I would say something like just sort of what you were going on. Like if the subject matter is interesting and compelling on its own, that's akin to say like really good ingredients.
Yeah.
But then the production company behind it is the one that's going to take those ingredients and actually like make the delicious whatever the paella or whatever you want to make, sort of put that together.
I mean, I would say it's more of kind of like we try to highlight the ingredients and why the ingredients are good. And so when you get to see that and you get to feel that, it's compelling. When you try to force it too much or when a candidate is too tight on how they want to kind of be perceived, people see that. And, you know, there's enough, like, that's when people lean into like fear mongering and lean into kind of like focusing on just being negative or attacking the issues on the other side. And to us, it's like, we want to work with candidates that believe in things that we believe in. So we tend to just only work with kind of progressive left-leaning candidates. And just kind of really lean into the things that we think make them compelling.
Do you think, because it's fascinating to me how political advertising or political video or however you know all the different aspects, how it might not, at least in a lot of places, change as quickly as or how the candidates want themselves to be perceived in media, you know, things hasn't really progressed in their minds as fast as, say, how most people consume their media. And by that I mean, like, you'd mentioned, and tell me if I'm off base here, but you'd mentioned like a candidate, it doesn't quite work when they're rigid and they want to sort of be like, well, I need to be perceived in this certain way to, you know, whatever, which seems like a very traditional, like, old school way of like, this is how I am on camera. This is like, you know, like very straightforward and whatnot. Where now I feel like, because we are constantly bombarded, not just in political things, but in everything on the internet, video has to, especially for something that's dealing with real world connotation, has to feel real and relatable and a little less kind of like business as usual as we used to see maybe 15 or 20 years ago how political ads work.
Yeah. And I think that's why my company and companies like it are getting a lot of attention. And you know, I'm not going to get into kind of the sausage making of that.
Yeah.
But we do partner with a lot of the traditional firms because they see that they can't recreate that. Like the firms that usually show up with like 5 cube trucks and perfect lighting and makeup and all that, and we're able to do that for a fraction of the cost.
Yeah.
And deliver something much more compelling. Now, you know, we won't do that for every candidate, and so we've gotten more and more choosy. The more we've become kind of we've matured in the industry and understood how it all works. But there is I would say there is a counterpoint to that as well, which is that as much as you're right, and I think the thing that we're doing is more powerful right now for a younger generation and for a national exposure, it is not as effective on a local level. So as far as fundraising, awareness, all that stuff, it's great. These videos are really compelling, but voter turnout and actual like turning, especially in primaries, like traditional methods are still really powerful. Now that's polling, letter, you know, because what house does everybody vote in? Senior citizen home. You know, like these are the people that go and vote like 90% and up.
Right.
And younger people, yes, there's more of them voting now, but just if you're playing a numbers game and on a local level, you know, we're talking about district level races. Like we worked with a candidate in Massachusetts who's really compelling, and he really leaned into us being able to like kind of do what we wanted. You know, within certain respects, but like he was kind of like open to a lot of ideas and had some money because he was really good at fundraising, and we did really good work. And he ended up losing by like 184 votes.
Ooh, right.
Against a woman candidate who was really compelling and had that kind of like, you know, this is in many ways the year of the woman candidate, and she was able to kind of lean into that and ran a good race, and he didn't have enough kind of cachet to make up that kind of ground. So, but he got super close. But again, it's this thing where like you could literally argue that in that specific county, if you know, a local community college had turned out 200 more people out of their,
he would have won.
He could have won. And so it's like sometimes it's that granular and that like specific, and that is where digital video doesn't really
interesting
as well. I would say, you know, like local 30-second TV spots are gonna get seen by people.
Right.
Like not everybody in the county is on Facebook getting served digital video.
I think with my question a little bit, my bubble was showing. in a sense, meaning like the way I ingest media is not necessarily.
But that's changing, right? Like, and we're seeing it good and bad, right? You're seeing it with the Bryces and the things, and then you're seeing the Russian, which. To just jump into our movie conversation a little bit, I thought that was like the one thing that I was like, wow, he really glossed over that really quickly. And he did not really go deep there where he went deep on a lot of other things, which I thought was just a really odd thing to gloss over, but his choice.
The movie we're talking about, again, is Fahrenheit 11/9. Matt, can you read us the... and before we jump into that...
Oh, yeah.
What? Did I...
No. You did a beautiful producer move, and you kept us on track.
Where Shahir jumped in and then sidetracked himself. But the reason I sidetracked myself is because of a previous week's sidetrack. In the last week's episode, we did say we were going to be reviewing Mandy this week.
We did.
And unfortunately, we that is just a difficult film to get to within our schedules.
In New York City, it was playing in one theater?
Yeah, one or two theaters, which was just unfortunately difficult.
What is Mandy?
Nicolas Cage's new film.
Is that why he did a Vanity Fair? I got served some, like Vanity Fair a thing about like the favorite characters he's ever played, and I was like, why is he being interviewed right now?
Probably this film.
Okay.
I apologize. We will try to get to Mandy. It's just a little bit of a difficult film for us to see. We did get a listener email in that actually did review Mandy, so I want to read that out just to.
Oh, that's nice. Do our jobs for us.
Do our jobs for us. This is coming from Stephen Priest, all the way in New Zealand. Too much style over too little substance. Maybe we kind of dodged the bullet on this one. Honestly, stylistically, a derivative take on the heavy metal comic with a 5-minute, 48-hour film festival script. Wow. Throw in a lot of cash and an unfeasible long runtime for what it is, and Nicolas Cage. That sounds better than it actually is. Nothing new, nothing to see. Go and watch Legion on TV, which does the art better and has a story.
Oh, wow. Legion is a beautiful show.
I have not seen that, but thank you, Stephen, for that. I still want to see Mandy, and we still will get to it eventually. So a little bit of a detour this week as we jump into Fahrenheit.
Of course.
But I couldn't bypass having Simon on the show.
Yeah.
That's what it really was.
I appreciate that.
We also have a review. Matt, I think you should read this.
Oh, I'm psyched. I just want to do this.
Just take it away.
So this is on iTunes from Last Fan Standing, which is a great iTunes handle, by the way, and not just because you agree with me later in this review. Bless Matt and Shahir. My job involves so much driving, and the only thing that keeps me from pulling out all of my hair over the terrible Ann Arbor traffic is listening to your podcast. I've been working my way up chronologically in order, so it's been a great experience for me. Wow.
All right, you can just stop there.
No, I can't. But I did just want to say
the great review, Last Fan Standing. Let's move on.
No, just before that, the going through our thing chronologically, maybe
take a while.
Last Fan Standing. Write us in onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com, and when you're done with this incredible experience, please tell me how you think both I and Shahir have changed over the 2.5-year course of this. Because like the one thing we've switched on, but this is the best part. It's not the best part. It's just it's my favorite. The last bit of the review goes. Oh, and by the way, Matt was 10,000% correct about the lobster in that review. I know it's random, but the truth must be spoken.
Well, it doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, you can have this one.
Thank you, Last Man Standing, and thank you, Shahir, for giving me the permission to be correct with our fan.
You know what's funny is when I read that review, I was like, what were we arguing about with the lobster? It was so long ago that
I remember.
Oh, you remember?
I did.
The movie The Lobster?
Yeah. I think the movie The Lobster, tangent, basically falls into a bit of a type of, I won't even say type of film, but a type of film structure where I am invested, like not for the 90% runtime until the very end, and then the ending, in my opinion, destroys the rest of the film because I just think it's either a cop-out or I think it's just derails the entire world it's built, stuff like that. Wow. And The Lobster was a universe that was so interesting to me while the film was going on, and then the end of the film left me like, oh, you didn't have an ending, so you chose no ending. In my opinion, that's now you remember. I remember. Now you remember. We don't have to get into it.
We're not going to get into it.
No, I don't remember the ending, so I don't know if that's like agreeing with you then, but
maybe
I remember the movie.
Yeah,
a little bit.
I don't know. So I thank you, Last Fan Standing. Appreciate the reviews. If anyone else would like to leave us a review, 5 stars or however much you feel we deserve, please head over to iTunes and do just that. Also, email us in at onlymoviepodcast@gmail.com or check us out at onlymoviepod on the Twitter box. We tweet some things.
We do. We tweet
on occasion.
How many episodes are you guys up to?
This is 180.
Yeah, 180.
Wow.
Yeah,
We have to start. We're getting close enough to start thinking about
200.
Yeah,
we
so
have to start thinking about what we're going to do for 200.
Yeah. Bring back all our guests, Quantum Leap style.
We'll
into
cram them in this
into the
room.
Yeah.
It'll be great. So,
Michael Moore, Donald Trump. I have to say, this is a topic we keep coming back to on this podcast. We've done.
we're talking about who would win in a fist fight, right? Because
that would be an interesting fight, to be honest with you.
There were a couple of scenes where he was walking where I was like, he is old.
Yeah.
they both. That's what I'm saying. Like it would be. I'd want to throw my hat in a certain ring, but then I'm like, fuck.
At any rate, I think on this podcast, one of the things we've done sort of in an interesting way, either consciously or unconsciously, is use films to discuss what is happening in the world around us. And in particular, the one topic we have come back to many, many times is Donald Trump. And that began with we did a special on the Art of the Deal with Johnny Depp.
Where I believe we like most of America was like, he'll never be president.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. In that episode, we were like, he'll never be president. This is just as ridiculous.
It was a comedy routine at that point.
And then he was president, and I forced us into kind of having a conversation about Michael Moore's previous film, Michael Moore in Trumpland.
Yes.
To kind of figure out where we'd gone wrong previously. And now has it been a year? It feels like it's been 10. How many years?
It's been 906 years.
Yeah.
It'll be 2 years.
It'll be 2
we're
years.
talking about his presidency.
Yeah.
It's been 2 years.
Not November, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Essentially, when the dread began.
Yeah.
And so we're returning once again to Michael Moore.
We've done one between then as well.
Have we?
We did where to invade next.
I thought we did that before. At any
Doesn't
rate, yeah. And I guess the interesting thing here is in some respects, trying to figure out how. One of the questions we asked in our Michael Moore and Trumpland episode is what cinema would look like under Donald Trump. We kind of discussed the idea that under certain presidencies, films, for example, under the Obama presidency, there was a sense of optimism, hope, maybe some sense, there was a lack of cynicism. Now, under we're still in those early stages of the Donald Trump presidency before movies started rolling out, but you've seen films like The Post, Black Klansman, for example, that really tackle the issue of Donald Trump. And now Michael Moore has returned to that fray. Now, Michael Moore, obviously a filmmaker, Oscar winner for Bowling for Columbine, famous for Roger and Me, Fahrenheit 9/11, which critiqued the George Bush years. So this is a filmmaker that I guess, for better or for worse, is attempting to have his pulse on the state of the world, state of America in particular, at any given moment, whenever he makes a film. He makes a film with purpose.
Yes.
And so this was an interesting one to return to, I guess, and a wonderful guest to have on this episode to kind of take the pulse of where we are as a nation right now. But Simon, what do you think about Michael Moore, and what did you think? What was your anticipation about this film?
Well, I think for starters, I think he is a very effective documentary filmmaker. He really gets you feeling about the things that he's talking about. It's his own version of propaganda.
Of course,
in an effective way. I think he does a really good job of kind of mixing archival with kind of his journey in this kind of like discovery of what he's trying to figure out about America, or trying to point a finger at, or kind of put a spotlight on. So I think he does that really well. He's probably one of the best in the business. I mean, that's what's, I'm sure we'll get into the details, but that whole like Steve Bannon thing where like Steve was like, oh, he does that really well. I'm just a apprentice to his like tactics. And you're just like, ugh. But,
what a horrifying thing to hear, if you're Michael Moore.
And so I think that's and it's good. And I think for me, it's one of those things where, I'm not going to say there's some like false equivalency here of like, well, this is the same thing is done on the right, if it's Dinesh D'Souza or whatever. I'm like, no, this is much more. There is like a lot of truth and fact and kind of evidence presented in a way that isn't kind of like overly skewed. Now, do I think that he kind of like cherry picks certain things, yes, but I think that's the nature of film. You have to kind of like pick your battles and create a narrative that works. But I thought it was well done for a movie that I felt was a little bit like buckshotty, like kind of just sprayed, in a number of directions. He was able to kind of still keep you kind of going along for the ride without kind of feeling completely. Although I think he overused the like fade to black, pause, and turn.
Right.
A couple times too many where I was like, he probably just kind of gave up on trying to find that natural bridge and was just like, let's go hard stop and then turn left.
He is a I like the buckshot analogy. He is very good at taking a large ship and steering it through a bunch of like narrow, almost stop, like I would call it film breaking moments, and just getting it through just barely, and like sort of still connected stuff, and really, whatever. Even some of this one more than any I've actually seen a lot had more of the hard cut to blacks pause. And it's almost like a reset for your brain. Like walking through a doorway, and it was a little bit jarring for me as well. Especially, I felt like the second half of the film had that more than the first. And I was wondering to myself if it had been a consistent thing, if it would have bothered me as much. I feel like the second half really rolled into that because it was a lot of different stuff. I mean, he didn't have fade to blacks, for instance, in Where to Invade Next, but that was a film that was very like, now we're in Italy. Now we're in wherever, like going down the thing. So there were natural break points for him. Yeah. But this is like a ton of ideas, a ton of topics, which all do link together in sometimes very interesting ways. But sometimes the connection, the dot connecting was a little bit stretched.
Yeah. It kind of reminded me of this, like, again, it wasn't a conspiracy theory, but like that idea of like the cork board with the red line, everything's connected, and then it's like, well, he gets to a certain point with something, and it's like he's kind of gone as deep as he can to make that point, and he's not going to end the movie here, so let's go to West Virginia and let's talk about that. And so again, the overarching message and point does connect. This idea that we're kind of losing our democracy in a certain way, and if we're not more engaged, and then that kind of question about engagement versus burning it all down and starting fresh.
Right.
He didn't answer a lot of questions, and it was definitely not about inspiring like, go and vote and we'll make it all better. It was kind of like, well, maybe we're fucked, and it's a matter of how fucked we are.
Michael Moore never, I've noticed this, doesn't really, in a couple of his films he does, but most of the times he's not a question answerer. He's a question poser.
Yeah.
He wants, I think he wants the audience to go out and be like, well, shit, now what? And that's... you could argue to the effectiveness of that based on, should in this particular case, such a well-known documentarian who is basically a celebrity in his own right, more so than a lot of documentary filmmakers.
Sure.
Should they have a stance that then is like, and here's the things you should do in this particular case? Or would that sort of lead into the problem and sort of make it sort of the other side of a propaganda? Like, it's all. Shahir, what about you, buddy?
So I'm a sort of tepid fan of Michael Moore. I think this is how I would put it, which is that I am in admiration of his effectiveness. I think it was a very smart choice of words there. He's an effective filmmaker. The difficult thing for me, I guess, is that he's preaching to the choir when it comes to me. So it's like, well, yeah, I agree. So what are you gonna do? The thing that I thought was really interesting in this is that we noted this in Michael Moore and Trumpland, which was a film we felt was kind of, again, pointed. It was he put it out for a reason right before the 2012 election, 2016 election, but I think we both agreed that it was a sort of slapdash of basically a TED talk that was kind of slapped together pretty poorly and not as cohesively as we kind of would have expected from an Academy
Award. It was not as polished, and not that his stuff is overly polished in any way, but there was less of it felt rushed.
It felt very rushed, but probably for a reason. So the thing that I think I was sort of impressed by is the ambitious scope of what this film is trying to do. It's trying to pull together a thesis about connecting Donald Trump to everything that Michael Moore has been talking about his entire career. And I think the most notable facet of that was seeing clips from Roger and Me in this movie.
Yeah.
Which was really, it got me thinking about, I think there might have been a better way to frame what this film is, but I think it was actually a pretty ambitious and, in my mind, fairly successful treatise, not about Donald Trump, but how we ended up with Donald Trump.
It's literally our Infinity War, but in real life.
Not seeing
Except
the connection.
half the population doesn't die.
Yeah.
Well, give it time. No, I'm saying like he
Did I
basically
spoil that movie?
not the snapping. No, I'm saying that all of his films up to this point, in a weird way, now have this interconnectivity, being the culmination of like we're watching all like everything he's talked about did kind of lead to this point.
Even for you, that's a little bit of a reach, but
I don't think so.
I'll take it.
I think it's very clear.
I have a theory
Okay.
that was building, and I think I have it cohesive enough where I can. I mean, again, I just saw it.
Yeah.
I think up until Election Day, he was making a doc about Flint,
Right. Yeah.
and it feels like he had to then left turn because Flint was no longer. It could no longer be the only thing that he focused on.
Yeah.
And the natural connections from that to Trump made it easy for him to kind of build around that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like in retrospective, thinking about the movie again, it really is like you could see that Flint was such a focal point, and most of that stuff was shot before the election
Yeah.
and leading up to it. The whole Obama moment, which was really jarring, and a couple of those things, and it just. That was where I think a couple times was like, okay, now it's kind of, you're really focused on Flint and you're giving me a lot here. And then you're kind of like going to West Virginia for a couple minutes. And then coming back to something else. And again, I think it's probably the reason, I mean, opportunity comes from circumstance and preparedness, but I think he probably at a certain point made that decision and then gave himself the time to really build it out right.
Yeah.
And then the natural tie to right before the election,
The midterms,
made
yeah.
sense. And so it's like he could have easily released 80 to 90% of this movie a year ago with what he had. But obviously this was kind of the goal, and so he kind of went this way. But the kind of byproduct of that is he had more time in the edit and more time to craft.
Find a narrative that made sense.
And so I think that was effective. And to your point, like this, even though there are these kind of like hard stop moments, there still is like it still feels like a whole movie.
I mean, let's break down what I guess each of us think the cohesive idea behind what this film is. Obviously, it's pointed towards the midterm elections when the title itself, or on election day, and leading us into the midterms. But what do we think the overall thesis of Michael Moore is in this film?
Even before we start that, I'll tell you what IMDb thinks the central thesis of this film is. Filmmaker Michael Moore examines the current state of American politics, particularly the Donald J. Trump presidency and gun violence, while highlighting the power of grassroots democratic movements.
Wow.
I think that's a description of what it is, but
it's not
a description of several of the points that are made.
It's like 4 of the 10.
Yeah.
But what is Michael Moore getting at with this film? What does he want to say about? I mean, on broad terms, he's obviously speaking directly about America, directly about the American political system. But what is the thing he's trying to say?
It feels to me, and this is a point that he's made in a lot of his movies, is that the influence and power of money and corporate interest is a corrupting influence that exists on both ends of the spectrum. And I think he makes the point of saying on the right, it's much more pervasive and unhinged almost.
Sure.
Yeah.
But then on the left, it has pacified and kind of neutered that that group, and in doing so has kind of removed the kind of enthusiasm and energy from,
Yeah,
from what would be theoretically be the majority of American people. Like, you know, if there was buy-in to his point about these issues where they currently stand, whether it's, you know, and it's funny, this, you know, people sometimes look at it like, oh, 54% of the country, that doesn't seem like a majority, but when you're dealing with the millions of people,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, 4% is in the millions of people.
Yeah.
I might not get my math right here, but it's a lot of people. And so I think to me, it was really about this idea of that, like, the system as we have it, the kind of like old guard is ineffective and kind of bought into this you know, kind of, you know, keeping the status quo alive as long as they can keep it alive. And the only way to, you know, that's the end game
Right.
Spoiler thing that we can get into later, but like that to me was the basic top line premise.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I think, as well, because he opens with this conceit that the majority of the American voting population is far more liberal than the political machinations, the political machinery would have you believe. You know, this idea, and I think it can be best summed up with the sort of fear-mongering Sean Hannity clip with, you know, like the fear of Medicare for all, the fear of, but, you know, college, public
college,
free
that's crazy.
Yeah,
Who-
exactly.
and it's like,
But you know, Michael Moore's point here is that America is far more left-leaning, and again, viewing this as a foreigner, you know, this fear of Medicare, you know, of socialized medicine is something sort of fairly unhinged, you know, if you think about the American population. So he sort of starts at that point, and I think his overall thesis is to illustrate the powerless. I also think that one of the things he's doing is he's echoing the sentiment that has been going around, I think in the majority of the voting population as they watch the daily deluge of oddity, of odd news, of strange, unelegant politics that's happening now. This frustration at the world we live in doesn't seem to reflect what we believe in. And I think what Michael Moore is getting at here is the way that politics has failed most of the American working class, or most of the American population, as he kind of estimates it. And but to me, there was a couple of, I think where the film turns was there was a quote from one of the writers in this film, and I can't remember the writer's name. I believe it was Michael Tucker, but I could be entirely wrong about that. But he said this one thing, which was that there's this notion that we must protect democracy against Donald Trump. And this author says, yeah, but America hasn't had a democracy. Has only had a democracy since the 70s. If America, if half the voting population, you know, if a fair minority cannot vote and don't have rights, that is not a democracy.
Well, at one point with women and minorities, it was the majority couldn't vote.
Yeah,
it's like.
And so that to me was the most jarring moment in the film is him reframing the idea that America has this sacred democracy and saying no. If you're a minority, if you're a woman, if you're poor in America has never been a democracy for you. And I thought that was a really fascinating point. And I think that's where the turn is for Michael Moore, is that realization that the dream that he is trying to protect from Donald Trump, or, you know, like protect against Donald Trump, is a dream that doesn't exist. And this sort of explosion of ideas that comes at the end of the movie about, like, basically fighting back against everything. So there's nothing off the table here. You know, there's the liberal apathy is an issue. The fact that people aren't voting, the idea that the Democratic Party is some bastion of hope in the midterm elections, the idea that the special counsel is a bastion of hope, is entirely built on a pretense of lies. And I think the reason why I think this film is so successful is that it articulates, admittedly sometimes clumsily, but it articulates that overall frustration that we all have right now, this feeling of powerlessness when we watch the news, when we watch the daily cavalcade of, like, you know, errors, you know, that seem to be coming out of this particular White House. So that's why I think the film actually was successful for me. And oddly, I think it's Michael Moore's most ambitious film. You know, it's inelegant. It's kind of got all of the problems of Michael Moore, you know, that he has as a filmmaker, but they're kind of secondary to what he wants to say.
It's also interesting too, because to be honest, again, this being the penultimate at this current point of his career, it's the film. There's two things. One, it's the latest one he's done, so he has a lot to build off of. Two, there's so much going on in the news cycle these days. Like he has so many things to pull from, and the fact. And it's funny because at first I was like, oh, well, it's just because there's so many things to pull from. But I do think it takes the type of filmmaker like Michael Moore to even put it into a remotely put together context and sort of idea, kind of like what you just said, Jahir. That line jarred me too. Like up until the 70s, we didn't have a democracy. And I was like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Which is a funny kind of contrast to Donald Trump's slogan, right?
The Make America Great. This is
great again,
the contradiction of that slogan.
Yeah.
And this idea, and like for him, there's obviously the kind of dog whistle racism to that. But it also ties to that idea of like when white men, made the laws and ruled, ruled everything. And not that has changed so much. But it's interesting, and it's interesting to kind of see that play out now with some of these, these really strong female candidates and candidates of color, and it's compelling, and that part of it, not necessarily from the movie, but in my kind of interaction with our political system, gives me hope.
So
sorry, I didn't really do my what's the thing, and I kind of agree sort of to both of your points. I think that the point that I rarely see, especially in a Michael Moore film, is that if we're looking at sides like the left and the right, both have been in this weird symbiotic relationship of basic corruption against, and it's either against the American people or negligent of the American people, if that sort of makes sense. Like, and I don't know if these are something that I was thinking about in the theater. I was like, okay, so he's saying that the right using, I actually, there's a side note. I think I normally hate the like, sort of like the Hitler initial analogy to Donald Trump. This was the first actual like full argument of like the build to it, when I was like
cohesive.
I was like, I can now see this 100, because a lot of times, I mean, on the internet, if someone doesn't like something, it's instantly Hitler. Like,
Obama, they put the stash on
exactly.
him, who knows how many times.
So so this was the most compelling thing of that. So I was like, oh, so he's saying that the right is corrupt, but so overt in its corruptness, and just sort of like basically showing everyone the corruption, but packaging it as like, we're shaking things up. Like, and so like, okay, like that's what that sort of thing is. And then the sort of the other real shaking part of it to me was the DNC, the convention, with the voting and the things that like.
So basically seeing the idea that Bernie had won several counties but was not nominated, and Hillary won.
And I feel like I feel like this film was saying, well, that was saying about the right. I feel like it was saying the left is just as corrupt, but their policy, well, not just as good. Sorry, that might not be the right term. The ways that they stay in power is much more. It's less out in the open, if that makes the most sense.
I would here's how I would frame it, and having been a part of it, I recognize I have a bias, right?
But you have more insight to it than I do. I'm saying like this was my initial thing of what I thought the film was saying.
I think the film does a good job of saying like, look, there is a machine on the right, there is a machine on the left that exists, right? There's a machine, and with machines, there are parts that just do their job, and when it's not rocking the boat, everybody's like, fine, the democratic machine is doing its job.
Go machine, go.
It is coalescing the largest group, constituency group it can, to kind of find an issue point that they can kind of agree on, right? Through compromise, whatever it is. Now, that gets corrupted by the influence of money and politics and kind of gets shifted. And so there are definite like flaws on the left that are similar to the right. I think for me, the issue between, kind of creating false equivalency between the left and right, and I think I said this early at the very beginning, is that there is a kind of like just vile corruption on the right that is not even attempting to be covered or masked by something. And you can, like with the Trump thing, it's like some people are like weirdly like praising him for that, for being so like overt about it. But with the left, I think what ends up happening is it's its own version of propaganda. You have money and influence that basically attempts to turn issues in such a way that they're beneficial to the construct, the machine, right? And the problem that ends up happening is, I think, is in a democracy, when people aren't engaged and involved, where does the fuel come from? If it's not coming from the electorate, it's coming now. When the fuel is coming from the people that have the power and influence, they're incentivized to keep people disengaged and keep people from feeling like they have a voice. Yeah. Because then they're still the only source of fuel. And so again, with the machine, there's a natural instinct to be like, well, this is what sustains the machine, so we're going to accommodate that part of the system. I'm not making an excuse for it.
No, yeah.
But I'm saying that it's easy for these new candidates to come in and say, well, we're going to break the whole thing down. As well, they haven't been in the machine yet, so they don't see how it works. Now, and that's why I think Michael Moore's later argument comes in about like, no, it's all broken. Yeah. We got to burn it all down. My only counter to that is the system broken? Are we as humans just flawed? And no matter what happens, we end up corrupting our own systems because we act in self-interest on either a personal or tribal level.
Sure.
And so, but that's a deeper...
Yeah, that's the interesting thing about the machine analogy is like what you're saying, what fuels the machine, and if voters don't vote, the machine breaks down. The machine will run out of fuel, etc. The interesting thing, and I don't know, we have to figure out a way for the analogy to sort of fit into this, but no other machine is it the machine's job to make sure the machine still has enough fuel. If that makes sense, because it is both parties' jobs to get people, if they want to be elected, until you start getting into sort of like, redistricting and, gerrymandering, like all of the things they do on the side to do it as well. It is their job not only to govern, but when they want to be reelected, to get people to vote them in or play with whatever rules the system has to get them voted in. Right. So it's the machine's job to sustain the machine so the machine can keep going. And that's an interesting sort of extra moment in the entire process that I can't think of another thing that's particularly like that.
So here, let me throw just one grenade into this for the purpose of spurring debate. It doesn't necessarily tie into the film, but you have these candidates like we just talked about that are like socialized medicine, job programs, so everybody's working. Stop spending on military so much and making tanks that nobody uses. If you boil it down, it's not like these military, like this funding that we have in this country, and I don't necessarily agree with this. I'm just saying this for the purpose of the argument, is unnecessary and frivolous and all this stuff. It's a jobs program. Right. I mean, that's the reason nobody votes against it, because every senator or congressman doesn't want that military tank factory to leave their state and those 30,000 people to stop working there. And so, the Boeings, the Lockheeds, the whatever's, like, we're constantly building these things that don't have a purpose, and that basically is socialism, like a version of. Now, we might not agree with it from the standpoint of it's building war machines, but it's socialism. So if they're building that or they're building gazebos, it's specialized socialism in a weird way, specifically, and it's run by very smart people that know how to game the system. And what we're really doing when we talk about solar energy, when we're talking about all these different things that are good for for the environment, whatever it is, we're making that they should be doing the same types of things, right? Like build enough solar factory, so you're employing, the big argument in the last year or so has been like solar actually employs more people than coal.
Right.
So coal, and that's a great argument, and that's actually how you shift that debate, right? The only reason we're still talking about coal is because Trump is a weird person. But like truly from a job standpoint, the number of people employed by coal hasn't moved at all. If anything, it's gone down. It has nothing to do with regulation. It's just not viable in the same way that other alternative energy is.
When you've gotten coal every year in your stocking, I'm sure you have an affinity to it as you grow older.
Right. And there's actually a very topical thing, and I'm sorry, I'm very good at getting off the rails.
This is great.
But with the storm that just happened, there were a bunch of reports already about how like the water getting into certain areas that were, there were still coal burning plants, and there was like a poisoning of
the air,
the flood water by that. And so it's another kind of like, and I know that doesn't jive with the earlier argument I was making, but it shows how like not great coal is as a energy resource.
I'm gonna jump back to I'm gonna jump away from the machine analogy for a little bit, but just talk about that in the film, the Bernie moment. There are many moments in this film. Obviously, the Flint crisis is almost a film unto itself.
Yeah.
And I think particularly for Michael Moore, a child of Flint, someone who's been dealing with Flint in cinema for so long, to see that Flint has endured another tragedy. Worse on the scale than the act of the leaving of General Motors, which is the subject of Roger and Me. But I think there's a phrase that's entered the political vernacular in the last couple of months, and it's a phrase that was injected on purpose. But the phrase is the Trump derangement syndrome. And this was a phrase that was entered in, it's a repeat of the Bush derangement syndrome, which was echoed in 2003. It's this idea that Trump, as a political figure, spars so much anger and hatred on the left that it creates this sort of deranged approach. This is the sort of Republican talking point, that the Trump derangement syndrome. But the thing about that Bernie moment is that I think there's an inkling of truth to this idea that what Donald Trump presented to the DNC around this decision to nominate Hillary over Bernie Sanders is an existential crisis, is a sense that the DNC were trying to figure out, okay, we've got this political neophyte on the other end who seems to be stirring up fear-mongering, hatred, who seems to be appealing to the worst of us that we don't really believe is a viable candidate. So what, as an organization, as a machine, if you will, do we do to coalesce against that? And for some reason, Bernie didn't fit that narrative as well as Hillary did. I don't agree with that, but I'm saying that's what I think the DNC did. But I think also what's happened with Donald Trump being in existence is it's caused, and it's sort of the inception of this movie as well, is it's created an existential crisis for what is it that we actually believe in, and how do we operate. Like, how do you suck air out of the room for someone who just lies, constantly? Like, how do you actually, if you have to take that seriously, like most of the time you just wouldn't take that seriously. You would not have that person in the room. But we have to deal with that person in the room now.
Sure.
We are essentially, ostensibly, deranged by that person.
A great Vox video on exactly this idea that he purposefully lies about everything because it creates
an
impossibility for you to ever catch up to correcting his lies. And it is a very purposeful, like everything from like my crowd size is the biggest, making up numbers.
3,000 people didn't die in Puerto Rico.
Because it's like the minute you try to be like, okay, let's talk about this, then he says the next thing and you're like, all right, well, that's a bigger lie. Let's go there. And so nothing ever gets covered. And the thing that they've studied, that I'm going to butcher this Vox piece, but they basically talk about that he just puts it out there and then it's discussed on these political shows, especially the ones where they do the let's have somebody on the left debate somebody on the right, creating false equivalency for like, is it a lie? Well, and then like what ends up happening is you don't remember the nuance or the detail of it. You just remember that it's a thing, and then you, based on your political leanings, you're like, well, it's a thing, and that must be it because that's
Right.
the team that I root for, versus that's a thing, it's a lie because I hate him, so it must be a lie. And so then it truly does become this kind of like, what is
existential threat,
what is,
right? Yeah. What is
what is
truth?
truth?
Yeah,
Yeah.
What is truth? How do I deal? And how do you, how do you deal with that? And I think we said this on our previous episode, which was that or one of the episodes about debating Donald Trump, and I think we talked about the idea that it's actually very difficult to debate Donald Trump, not because he's a good debater, but because I think the rational actor would go, there's no point to debating this person
Right.
because there's no legitimacy to this argument.
This is a bit of a tangent, but I disagree with there's no point to debating him, because I agree with everything up to that point.
Yeah.
I think the way there's two ways you shut down and these are all hypothetical. The two ways you shut down not obviously the presidency of Donald Trump, but the take the air out of the room of the Donald Trump constantly lie, don't let us keep up message. And one way is impossible, and the other way I'm just sort of like, maybe it'll happen. The way that's impossible is stop covering him. Still hold him account to certain things, but don't make it this like the fair and balanced, normalizing a debate of a thing that should be like common sense. It's not going to happen. There's too much money in networks and things, and that's how it goes. And so in a way, his maneuverings of his entire career led to this point. Donald Trump's he's in a system that is not looking like it's going to break down anytime soon. Even once Trump is gone, the system that sort of catapulted him, and Michael Moore touches on this a little bit in the beginning of the film, the system of how the news cycle works will still be going on. The other way I think it is possible, however, and I'm literally shocked that it hasn't happened yet, but the fact that it hasn't leads me to believe that maybe it never will, is someone on the other side and I'll use the words charismatic, but I'll say charismatic and vocal. Getting to a point of power where they can directly challenge him. And I don't see, that's the thing. Originally, before this all happened, I was like, obviously someone's going to, it's what Michael Moore says in the thing, like this false hope of like, oh, this'll do it. Oh, this'll do it. Oh, this'll do it. I thought that someone would come up and be like, let's get get on a stage with Donald Trump or a debate or something like that, and literally be like, sadly not be like as political, but like be like, you're a buffoon and here's all these reasons.
Sure. I have a counter to that.
Yeah, I have a counter to this as well.
That I'll bring up that it ties to a larger theory I have, which is that these things happen because there are vacuums that create them.
Makes sense.
Like Trump couldn't have happened 8 years ago.
Yeah.
And there's a reason that he didn't try to, because Michael Moore takes it even further, saying that which is broke my heart as a No Doubt fan, seeing that Gwen Stefani is responsible for all of this was just heartbreaking. But there is this level of like, where is their opportunity? And I think there was a kind of, in the same way that as powerful and kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of iconic Obama was, right?
Mm-hmm.
What he did that was bad is that he created a complacency on the left.
Yeah.
Where everybody's like, he's got it. Like, let him deal with it. Like, I don't need to go vote. I don't need to go run for something. Like, he's got it. He's the savior. He's going to fix it all. And the problem is within 2 years of his first term, just started losing, all the levers of power that he had access to, which really limited what he was able to do and forced him. And this is the Democratic thing where he made fun of this too, to compromise, which then really put him in dire straits with his African American base that was like, what's the deal? Why is he compromising with these racist white guys instead of looking out for us? And very liberal people were like, why is he not being more liberal? I thought he was liberal. And that was him just trying to get things done.
Yeah.
And again, you're the most powerful person in the world theoretically from a running a country, the largest country or most powerful country standpoint. So it's like you know, it's easy to kind of like throw shade on him for this decision, that decision, even that thing with the water.
Yeah, I was curious what you thought about that.
I was disappointed, and I think anybody who, you know, and I don't know him as a friend, but I know him as somebody who's seen him behind the curtain, right? Like not on.
Yeah.
And he's a wonderful, really just warm, like everything I thought about him before I worked for the campaign was multiplied by 1,000. Like I saw him just be so kind and so engaged and so genuine with so many people that I was like, I was exhausted just being there following it. And he was just, you know, he cares so deeply. And I think that's like the root of most, you know, true Democrats is that there's a caring. The problem with that caring, there's often compromise and kind of like, and then there's this whole like, when we get into the machine conversation of like, you're caring because you think that these interests will put money into your district, which will then create jobs, and you're still caring about your district, but you're doing it in like a effed up way that is hurting other people or hurting other, you know, districts or states or whatever it is. But the larger point I was trying to make about this is that I think with the 8 years we had of Obama, we really created a, like, just, there wasn't anybody compelling coming up on the Democratic side for 8 years, which is a really crazy thing. And we were losing elections left and right, and he was going out trying to do his thing, but like people just weren't compelling because the people that were coming out and running were people that they were there for not great reasons.
Right.
And when he went away and this all happened, you saw this explosion. And the right did something very similar when Obama was president. They were kind of saying like, hey, the world's on fire.
Yeah.
He's going to take your freedoms.
Yeah.
And like, it didn't bring the best of the best to the table. It brought the craziest
Brought
of the
the loudest.
craziest.
Yeah.
And so you had this kind of like, this room full of crazies, and the Republican Party for a while tried to kind of control that. And you saw that kind of happen in 2012 with like Mitt Romney still kind of like, you know, kind of being like, okay, well, there's one adult in the room, like, let's just like help him.
Yeah.
And it's not so dissimilar with what happened with Hillary, where it was like, yes, Bernie was compelling, he was interesting, but there was a lot of moonshot stuff that people were just like really into, but there wasn't a lot of like nuance and detail about how that's something you can accomplish with a Republican Congress and a Republican Senate. And so where Hillary is like the seasoned politician who's like, okay, I'm gonna like try and wheel and deal here.
Maneuver, yeah.
And everybody's like, oh, fuck that. Like, we want to burn it all down. Bernie, 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 Bernie. It's like, yeah, great. But that doesn't, like, again, if we're here to like protect the democracy, that's just the left version of like fucking up, like burning down the house versus the right version of burning down the house. Right. And so it's like, you know, as a, you know, now getting closer to my 40s human being, like, you have to have like some rational part of this. Again, if we're talking about like, you know, the government and everything, it's all a compromise. I mean, that's what government is. And when you have these politicians who are become rock stars because they're saying, I'm not going to compromise on anything, that's counter to what a democracy is at its core.
Right. So do you think though, the fundamental flaw in Michael Moore's rhetoric in this film is this idea that that the system is just fucked and we need to blow it up and start again, because the foundation of the system is conflict, and we are at a crisis point of conflict right now. Do you think that is a fundamental flaw in the kind of the final third of this film, which lurches into you know, posturing the idea that fascism is on its return, and that you know, like there's a Hitler-esque quality to.
I think that there is a realness to that.
Right.
You know, you look at Venezuela and some other places, and you can see like it's not. I think that we as a country and democracies in general, we're closer to that turn sometimes than we like to believe.
Yeah.
You know, like.
We may have already fallen off the cliff. We just don't realize.
You know, sometimes it takes less than 51%.
We're Wile Coyoteing it right now. We're still running, and there's nothing under us. We just haven't looked down.
Yeah.
But I think the bigger issue for me is always this idea that like somehow that like, you know, there was this Atlantis that once existed where we had it all perfectly figured out, and like, we just need to, I'm not in the American context even, just like this idea that like, look, democracies work, but they're fragile, and they're fragile because they only work when people buy into them. You know, like when you believe in it, then it's like magical thinking, like it can work, but when you stop believing in it, it stops working.
And sometimes, even to your point before, Simon, and I don't know, I might be twisting words here, but I think almost the same can be said for when you believe in it too much.
Sure,
because
then it becomes
then you still don't. You're inactive, and
no, it's a really, I think it's a very delicate thing. And I think what makes it so delicate is human nature. Like it's the tribalism, it's the thing, like I think about sports all the time. And it's funny because if you deal with people from Washington, D.C., you'll find that like their way into conversations is often sports analogies and sports. It's just like a thing because that's
the social. Sports is a shorthand for tribalism.
It's a social lubricant.
Humanizes me kind of thing. But sports is, I find it very similar. Like I'm a Jets fan and I don't like Patriots fans. But I recognize that they're humans and that they like have a right to cheer for their team and disrespect my team. But in certain dynamics, you see that the line gets crossed, and that tribalism becomes where you dehumanize the other side, right? Like there's been like those videos where like somebody walks around Boston with a Yankees jacket and they just start getting punched, by somebody. And it's like politics is not so dissimilar from that.
It's exactly
like
the same.
We begin to like look at these Trump supporters and say, well, they're just idiots. And again, I'm not going to make a false equivalence here and say it's the same thing on the left. I think there's much more empathy on the left than there is on the right for the most part. But I do think that at the end of the day, there is this thing of like, the other team and people, and that's why it's like tonally people just don't
tribalism is rampant.
And the problem we have with like the news media, your point earlier about the news media, is they feed into that because to them that's the ratings getter. It's like that's why CNN. I mean, their bread and butter is this like. Let's
bring someone on the right,
let's have Manchester United and Chelsea, and like let them throw punches at each other.
Getting back to a little bit of like my idea of like how no one has sort of stepped up to be what I sort of meant by that sort of mouthpiece, and not like in sort of the overly politicized sort of like either a candidate or I don't know how it goes, but like. Where is the person, this mythological savior I've just invented in my head, but where is this person that is equally, this is a weird thing to say, abhorrent, right? But just has leftist views? Because it's like, so I'm going to go a little bit up and around.
Avenatti? No.
Yeah. The reason I ask this is it's more of a hypothetical or philosophical question, because I do honestly believe this is a weird tangent, but I will come back. I just did a whole series for the YouTube channel I work for, Extra Credits, on the history of quantum computing and how how light is both a particle and a wave, and how what waves actually cancel each other out, and actually reality, if you think of the theory of the most recent physics, depending on if you believe on the whole bunch of stuff, basically reality could be seen as basically waves of possibility interacting with each other.
Sure.
And waves like as in water. So if a wave follows another wave and connects, it can get bigger. If two waves hit each other, they'll sort of become a trough, like the wave in the trough, it'll even out. Where is the even out point in this particular political world that we've hit? Like I want to find the yen to Trump's yin.
Sure.
I don't.
So what I think
not there.
What I think about that argument is that there is a that there is a belief that there is an equilibrium to the world. Like for every Trump, that there is an equally good whatever. The problem there is that what we're not acknowledging, perhaps only in this conversation, but we are, I think acknowledging on a daily level, is that Trump is not normal by any metric. He's not normal,
of course,
against any metric that exists. He is a person who seems to defy all basic levels of civility that we would presume you would need to exist as a human being. But the one factor that makes that possible, and I think it's something that you've raised a couple of times in your opening discussion of this film, and I think it's at the heart of what Michael Moore wants to say, is that the corrosive power of money is something that we have to reckon with against what we think democracy is. So the way that other countries, for example, the Scandinavians, Norway, Finland, all of Bernie Sanders' greatest hits, is basically to say that we need to equalize the power of money by redistribution of wealth. We need to, and what that does is prevent a person like Donald Trump, who I don't think has any concept of what it means to not have money and what it means, and what it means to have power and influence because of that money, despite his own ineffectiveness at basic humanity, humanity. And I think, where, the point that you make is what is the equilibrium there is maybe a little bit too hopeful about the idea that there is a yin and a yang to the world, and a little bit, and I think that's what Donald Trump is. What Michael Moore is trying to say with this film is that this idea that we will be saved, that there is someone out there, that there is an order to the world, is a narrative that exists in movies.
This feels like a God argument. No, I'm just
yeah. Well, no. I think honestly, I mean, you could extend it to. I wouldn't even go to a God. I would say an existence or a reality argument, because I don't think that there is. How do I put it?
Like for example, I can see people coalescing around Beto O'Rourke right now with that same sort of thinking.
Here's what's funny, and this is how fast our world works now, right? You're saying that, you're making that point about like, where is this person, right? This figure, and we are 2 years removed from a transcendent president who was both black and white, who spoke in poetic verse, who inspired, who did all of these beautiful things, and in some ways we look back longingly, but in other ways we look back and say, oh, well, it wasn't as beautiful as the inspiration that we were sold at the beginning of it.
And I think that's why that water moment is important. Yeah. I think that water moment is important and I think that's why, again, I think this film works, is the water moment illustrates this idea that we seem to have, and I do this as well. Whenever I hear Obama, like when I read an Obama tweet, I tear up. Yeah. Like when I see him tweeting about the same thing that Donald Trump should be tweeting about, I kind of tear up at like, why isn't the world like this anymore? And the water moment was the water moment, thinking about Yemen, thinking about whistleblowers, thinking about the Wall Street bailout, is this idea that we do place a lot of value in saviors. And that value has made us complacent. That value has made us believe in an order to the world that I just don't think necessarily
it goes back to that argument of like, yes, he is this transcendent political figure. He's, we have deified him in some ways, but at the end of the day, he was just like the largest cog in that same machine.
Yeah. Right. The sort of a 2-point structure. One, we 100% love heroes. In fact, if you go back to every story in most of all of humanity, the entire, a third, if not more, is always the hero's journey. Like, we're always looking for someone or something in any narrative, fiction or nonfiction, that is sort of the correct person that we can rally behind. Very rarely are you told a story that can effectively bring you to be to that level. It's always sort of someone else in a way. So the deification of Obama, let's just say, like the thing that gets me, and I don't know if it's a common sense thing or something along these lines, but like if you just look at the baseline of Obama and Trump, you having spent some time with Obama, and not friends or anything like that, but again, like you said, believe you saw behind the curtain slightly, and whatever. Your account of Obama does not surprise me in the least.
No,
He comes off, for any flaw or praise, he comes off as a genuine human being and someone that not only can make a statement eloquently, but he's not. I would never use even for his flaws. I would never say Obama is nefarious.
Right.
No.
Right? Sure. And then you look at Donald Trump, and instantly, I mean, even based before this president, like before he was running for president, you kind of knew he was a scumbag. He was a funny scumbag, but he was a scumbag. And I'm wondering where I mean, I kind of know we could get into it of like, oh, just rallying to a base and trying to tell people that they're special in certain ways and like, you've been screwed by this other person and blah, blah, blah. But I go back to and I think maybe I misquoted my quantum theory argument from before. Could it be another person? Sure. I don't think it's going to be. I do think, and this is not a God moment. I think this is a reality moment. It's the way I believe, to be honest, the way that the essential building blocks of the universe, whether you're talking about atoms, whether you're talking about quantum, whatever that is, does have a set of rules and a set, I won't even say balance because that's the wrong thing, but there will always be a counterweight. Trump, in a very real way, is a counterweight to the 8 years of Obama and the vacuum that was left.
I call that the pendulum swing. But
Yeah.
Same thing.
So what is going to be the other thing? Is it going to be the potential blue wave in November? Is it going to be another particular candidate? Is it going to be the destruction of the way our country works? And getting back to the film, I don't know if I think Michael Moore is saying that, yep, it's all fucked, burn it down. I don't think that's what I think he's posing that as an option, and I think because that's the most striking option, it could stick more and it sort of seem like that's what he's saying. I don't think, again, I go back to my original thought on my first thought of this film. I don't think Michael Moore ever actually definitively says real specific, like, this is what we should do in films.
Right.
He puts things out there and people gravitate toward what they think their logical conclusion would be, for better or worse. I think he brought up enough points in this film, and I guess we're sort of getting into my final thoughts because we've been going for a little while, gentlemen. I think what was effective for me with this film was that the ideas he put forth, even at the disjointed end when he kept cutting to black and whatever, and there was tons of stuff we didn't even touch on here: the school shootings, the teacher strikes, the particular moment where he drove a Flint water truck and sprayed it on the guy's lawn, which made no cohesive sense whatsoever.
And my one thing with that, this was my one like glaring, like, Michael Moore
exactly
moment, whereas he had just finished pointing out how like much of a shtick it was for Obama to drink the water.
Yeah.
And then he does the most shticky thing.
Exactly.
Which is like this, like,
and I was
like, come on, guys.
I was like, where is this going? And I was like, are they going to show that it killed his lawn plants? And then nothing. And I was just like, oh, this is your trailer moment. Like, cool.
Yeah.
But overall, I think it's an effective film that asks a lot of really big and uncomfortable questions of us, because a viable option, shittily enough, is burning it down. Do I want that to happen? Absolutely not. And do I think that it can still be saved? Yes, I would. I don't have a lot of faith in humanity, but I have a lot of faith in money. This is a weird thing, and not that I have a ton, but like the greed will always win out, in my opinion. But there are certain types of greed that in order to sate the level of greed, it's in the greedy's benefit to not have society like a country completely collapse. So therefore, I don't think we'll go to that place of, quote, burn it down. But I think it's not. There's no definitive answer that he presents that is correct or what will actually happen. It's going to be an amalgamation of everything, and I'm glad that these things were brought up in this film. I'm glad that it's out there, but at the same time, to Shahir's point, it's a little bit preaching to the choir. I was sitting in the audience, and it was the leftist audience I'd ever seen, but it was also the oldest leftist. I was the youngest person in that theater, I guarantee you. Granted, I went at 4:30 on a Friday, but it was all older people that were either cheering or booing at certain parts.
It wasn't high school kids.
Exactly, but they're also the voters. Side note, real funny story. there was an older couple that sat next to me, and due to assigned seatings, they had to sit next to me. And it was weird. The man went to sit near me and then didn't. He's like, "Oh no, I want the other seat." And his wife's like, "Why?" He's like, "I want the other seat." It might have been because I was eating nachos, but I was making sure to finish them before the movie started because I'm not a monster. So the wife sat down next to me, and they were like having like 80-year-old couple like fake argument in front of me. And the guy kept trying to hold her hand after he went a little too far with the argument. And she's like, "No, you lost your chance. You lost your chance." She's like, "I'm going to hold his hand." And she pointed at me. And I literally, without even looking, I just went. And she took my hand. And I was like, well, you didn't want to sit next to me, so I'm going to hold someone's hand. And we all had this like big laugh. And it was like a funny sort of moment. It has nothing to do with the movie.
Was that before or after the movie?
It was before the thing. Yeah. I'm sorry I went on that tangent, but it's
But it speaks to humanizing. Like they became
it was
abstract.
Yeah, but it's great that we had that moment of closeness. But I feel like the entire theater was filled with people that I probably could have gotten away with that with, and it wouldn't have taken a large discourse for. I want more people to see this. I don't think people outside of our particular realm of bubble or influence really will give it a shot because they're going to see Michael Moore, Bob, fuck that guy, like da 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 da. So. It was effective for me, but I already had my mind made up on sort of where I was going.
Yeah.
The one constituency group that I'd be interested to see if this moves the needle, and going like people going to see it is, it really did like and I think this is his like roots Flint part of it. This idea of like organized labor, organized unions. So it'd be interesting to see kind of like if this movie ends up inspiring some of those labor groups outside of the teachers unions to kind of be like, hey, we can have that moment too if we all come together and kind of like, and I think that was one of his like battle cries of the movie was just like, hey, if people really do organize and line up with a shared interest, they can change something, even when it's like this shitty West Virginia governor guy who
Rick Snyder
seems
no,
super
sorry, that
shady.
That was the Michigan governor.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean...
And that guy's just awful. Jesus.
He's
never buying a Gateway computer again.
I remember when I was young, when I was like 16 or 14 or whatever, I was like so excited for Gateway because they had the cool like canted angles in their commercial and a fucking cow as their logo. And I was like, this is dope. I don't know. Anyway.
So, I'll be brief on my thoughts. I think this is a very effective film. I agree with your point that it's effective for me because I'm already in the seat that is leaning towards what this film is talking about.
Which was your original point that I stole.
Okay. But I think to me, it comes back to that. It seemed to be an obvious statement, but it was one that when it was articulated in the film, it made me reconsider where I was at that particular moment. And that was the statement that we haven't had a democracy. We've only had a democracy since 1970s. And I think the rise of someone like Donald Trump speaks to the fact that America as a population, and I'm saying this as an outsider, hasn't dealt with racism. It just hasn't dealt with racism. And if you look at the origin of Donald Trump, in the political sphere, it's birtherism. And birtherism in any political context should be an absolute check mark for life. Mitt Romney lost the election for saying 47% of the population is on welfare. Howard Dean lost for shouting "yeah" or "yeehaw." So saying that the first African American president might not legitimately be American should have been an absolute nullification of that person's legitimacy from the get-go. That is a person. If they said that on the subway train, you would move to another carriage, or you would ask for them to be ejected if they shouted it in a room. So I think that to me, that alongside the corrosive influence of money are just two factors that are so embedded within the political system and have not yet been reckoned with in a way that effectively moves us forward. And so the thing about this film is that although it is preaching to the choir to me, and preaching to, I think, to the choir of this room. And maybe one of the while you are a terrific guest, one of the errors we made is not inviting a hardcore Republican who supports Donald Trump to be in the room, which is, we have tried that. It's just difficult to find.
It's very difficult to book.
Difficult to book in New York City. But I think
Republicans, you want to make a killing in New York City to go talk about stuff?
go to Fox News.
But
Or
at the same
CNN.
time, we might be doing the same thing that the news is doing if that's the case.
I think it would be
It depends on
valuable
the
for
type
It
us.
of
depends on the.
Republican.
Now I'm globalizing.
Yeah,
Yes,
but I think it would be.
If
I
you
think
get a
it would be
Steve Schmidt
valuable.
Republican is very different
Right.
from like a what's that, the Russian sounding guy,
Neil
Gorka, whatever it is.
right.
By the way, you want to see something fascinating? I don't know if you have it in your cable. There's a cable news channel called America One or American
Yes,
One.
I have seen these clips.
Holy cow! It is like. It's like a poor man's Fox News on crack.
Yeah.
It's a wild thing to watch. I don't know how many people actually watch that channel, but it's a weird thing.
I haven't had cable since 2013, so I have no idea.
So those are my thoughts. Simon, do you want to take us out just with your kind of like, you have been embedded in this world. You have been embedded in watching politicians do what they do, and I'm really interested in your take on not necessarily Michael Moore's film, although that is interesting, but on the state of the world as it exists today and why it might exist today.
I'll try to focus on 2 points in this. And my first point is that whether we deify or vilify, at the end, the thing that sometimes gets lost in this is that these are still just human beings, right? And they act on, learned behaviors that are sometimes primal. If you look at and that's one of the distinctions I sometimes make about Republicans is they tend to be more primal in their thinking and their behavior. So fear, anger, other, just very primal instincts.
The dark side.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, those things don't resonate those concepts don't resonate forever because they're not
Abstract,
real.
yeah.
They're connected to something. And I think that there is a on the left there is a more kind of analytical, evaluative process to thinking, and it's still skewed, it's still tribal, and all those things. But that to me is the distinction. So, but to the original point, people deified Obama, and I had the fortune to be around him enough to be like, oh my God, he is just a human being, and he's maybe the most perfect, best human being we ever had, and the system kind of got him beat too. He did a lot of good things, and people, and Trump has rolled back a lot of those things, but he did a lot of good things, and people don't realize a lot of why our economy is good right now is because of things he did, of safeguards he put in place.
100%.
And the whole thing about the economy was dead in the water for the first 2 years of his presidency and all that stuff. But I think at the end of the day, I mean, he's still just a guy who probably has moments of self-doubt and insecurity and wants to just go, take a bottle of gin and just forget the world. And he can't do that because there's a camera on him constantly. And he was able to be so graceful and he had to be perfect. And he knew that because he represented something that hadn't been, any mistake he made, like the Reverend Wright thing, was going to be blown to pieces. And he was still used as the linchpin for why the Tea Party movement, which is all these things that when we were talking earlier about how does Trump happen? It's you unleash the beast and all of a sudden the beast becomes self-sustaining and it no longer needs its host. It just needs to feed more. And, some of those Tea Party candidates that came in and were like, okay, we're going to play ball. And then they were like, no, now I want the ball and I just get to keep it and play my game. And that stuff is real and it happened. And it was, I think, in many ways, the thing that kind of led to Donald Trump. And I do think to kind of steer that into something hopeful. Well, one, because I'm going to do this so that I get to not be destroyed by my wife at a later date and time. That I think that in the same way we deified Obama, we especially we as Democrats or progressives or liberals, we are at fault for not deifying, but kind of like overly negatively painting Hillary Clinton. Like, it's this thing where there was a study done a while back that said, like, anytime Hillary Clinton wasn't running for office, her popularity was in like the 70s and 80s,
Right.
like across the board.
As first lady, as a senator.
Sitting senator,
Yeah.
all these things. She was great at making deals. You know, she was compromised, this, that, the other thing. But whenever she was running for anything, her approval went down almost 20%, 25%. And I think part of that has to do with being a woman at the time that she was a woman. And it is off-putting to a lot of men in power to see a woman be kind of that savvy and aggressive. And I think part of it is also that because she had been in the theater of politics for as long as she had been, she'd made a lot of enemies, and she'd had a long track record to point at. And many people say that the reason she lost to Obama in 2008 was not just because Obama was so transcendent and kind of charismatic. It was also because he had a 2-year track record to look at. So there wasn't a lot to kind of pick apart and look at negatively. I mean, she had her husband's legacy, her legacy. And the thing that I think is most messed up about the way that people kind of like put the loss on her is that, like, people blame her for her husband. And like, how fucked up is that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, her husband cheated on her, and it's her fault because she stayed with him. Like the reverse of that, the man would be like, you know, like, oh, he stayed with her even though she was she was not faithful to him, but he stayed with her. That's a sign of somebody that loves and respects his wife and like is willing to like give her a second chance. And because she did it, she's a weak, flawed, you know, character. And so that's just my point about humans. Like, we're all, at the end of the day, Hillary Clinton is a human being. And my wife has told me stories like being around her when the cameras aren't on, and she's just a really nice lady. She's like your middle school English teacher, like, but in like the nicest way, not in like a weird, you know, like scoldy way. And so, like, I think sometimes we get away from that with some of these people that, like, oh, they're this, and, you know, Trump is just a whole different animal. But generally speaking, these are human beings. They're flawed. They make mistakes, and we want the best people, and we want to be able to separate real bad mistakes from, you know, smoking pot, whatever it is, like whatever your kind of like knock is. And the reason I make the distinction is like the whole thing with Kavanaugh right now, like that is not a like people make mistakes. Like, no, that you're a shitty bad person. If at any point in your life you thought that was okay to do to somebody, fuck you. Like, that's, you don't come back from that. Now just I'll pivot from that to my
a la Michael Moore.
To my hopefulness. and so my kind of general theory on humanity is that, you know, we tend to kind of like overly critique what's currently going on, but the general trend of humanity has been towards being more and more civilized, generally speaking.
There's been setbacks, but yes.
Yeah, and that goes back to this idea of a pendulum, right? Like, generally, Obama has said this many times, you know, that the arc of history is towards progress, you know, and there are backswings and there are moments that are darker than others, you know, the Nazi Germany, the Inquisition, the Dark Age, whatever it is, but then there's always that kind of like return from that. I mean, you know, I'm also not born of this land. I was born in Germany, and I would say that, like, you know, that was Germany was in a really dark place for a significant amount of time, but the kind of reaction to that was like for a very long time, and still, even though it's teetering now in Europe in general, but like they were a stabilizing Western democracy that provides healthcare for their citizens and does a lot of progressive things in green energy and all kinds of things. And I think in a lot of ways that was still just a reaction to being like really shitty and
Yeah.
being like, we don't ever want to be shitty like that again.
But they made a special effort also to recognize the historic.
Oh, yeah.
and to continually remind themselves. Of the history.
And it's starting to fade a little bit, which worries me. I go back a decent amount because I have family, but like I remember when I was younger, like literally it was like this weird. I'd be around my grandparents and they were very like loathing, like well, whatever America wants to do, like we're cool with that because they're the good guys
Right.
and we want to be aligned with the good guys, and like it was like almost like a little over the top, but. Again, my point is that these things happen, like these moments in history happen. They're not great. I don't know if they're supposed to happen, but I do know that generally speaking, humans are still evolving. We're still shaping society. And I think that the general trend in that is towards a better version of it. Now, it doesn't always seem like that in the micro kind of perspective, but when you look at, instead of looking at like tens or hundreds of years, you're looking at thousands of years.
Sure.
We're better. And then just a little curveball at the end there, which I think you'll enjoy based on your YouTube perspective on what you were talking about before. If Elon Musk is correct and we're living in a simulation, the concern is, are we living in a simulation that will self-destruct because of Donald Trump or some other catalyst, or are we living in a simulation that ends up in a utopic future that is great?
Well, the interesting thing about that is it doesn't matter from our perspective, from our limited perception of our own universe.
Right.
Either of those things still suck equally.
Yeah, and we die at the end anyway.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
that's a perfect way to take us out.
Well,
we
this-
will all die in the end.
this has been the only podcast about the film Fahrenheit 11/9. Simon, thank you so much for coming on
Yeah, this has been fantastic.
and chatting and lending your
Did I
expertise.
pass?
You passed, and,
Yeah.
and now we will reveal if the world is actually a simulation. Maybe. When you are not, good sir, kicking it on Air Force One and talking with one of the most wonderful men on the planet, and I don't mean either of us, I'm
Yeah,
of course
no,
talking
it's
about
clearly not
Obama.
us. Yeah.
Where can folks find you?
They probably can find me just by the fact that I'm on Facebook or on Instagram. With
Sure.
a regular, I believe I still have a very cheesy Instagram hashtag, which is @SciGuy. No, is it I don't even. No, that's my Twitter handle. Sorry. Twitter's older, so I
Gotcha.
did
And you have an
cheesy thing
unusual
there.
spelling, right?
Yeah,
So
it's
just 'cause this threw me off.
SAIMONK, I believe, for Instagram, which is the thing that I probably interact with
Right.
most frequently. But generally speaking, I just work a lot, and so that's what I do. And my company is Hardpin Media, which I love. I have really great employees that care deeply about democracy and doing good things in progressive politics. And we're trying to fight the good fight
Nice.
in that skewed kind of left-leaning way.
Awesome. Shahir, when you are not... what's the word I'm looking for? When you are not...
Wrong about the lobster?
When you... Sure, why not? I was at loss of words, but you saved it. Where can folks find you?
You can find me being, sulking in the corner of regret at my website at www.shahirdaud.com. Matt, when you are neither a 1 nor a 0, or could potentially be both, where can people find you?
All of my particles are highly entangled at MatthewKroll.com and MatthewKroll.com for my life and works. Also Skeletor, the number 4, PREZ on Instagram, or Emperor MSK on Twitter. Also, please check out Extra Credits, my YouTube channel at this point, where we just released our first thing on quantum computing. We're going through the history of the Society of Majapahit, and I believe we just released something on the joy of losing in gaming. Why we should, and actually, it's a little bit goes into the topics we're talking about here, because when you make something, a video game, politics, relationships, anything, when you literally boil it down to a win or lose sort of binary, going back to your thing, Shahir, right there, you're kind of missing the point of the entire exercise. Because if something is in fact fair, if something is officially like 50-50 balanced, and you have it as a very like win or lose, 50% of your base is going to be disappointed no matter what you do. So anyway, it doesn't tie in exactly, but it's something that sort of fits into a little bit of what we're saying. Simon, thank you very much for coming on. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back next week. What are we doing?
Let's try for Mandy again. Let's just keep saying
keep lying.
every week. Let's say it's Mandy and then do something else.
Okay, sure. I guess next week will be Mandy.
Yeah, sure. Why not?
All right, talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.